Yeah, that is our weird fucking intro.
I like that for
First
some
time
reason.
I made it on the MIDI keyboard, and when you first started, you were like, "That's shit. You fucked up at the end."
I didn't know that that's your intention.
Yeah, well, that was my intention, but we'll see if people actually like it or get annoyed by the fact that it's all fucked up at the end. Okay, so this is going to be our first attempt at doing a podcast together.
Yeah.
Just to see whether or not people even like our dynamic or just find us annoying as shit. So we'll do what everyone does and just do a murder podcast, I guess. True crime. Everyone loves that shit, right? So yeah, today's story that I have to tell is going to be something that's hard to pronounce: the Hinterkaifeck murders.
Damn, that's really a
Okay,
hard
yeah.
word for me. The Hinterkaifeck?
You say it better than I do.
The
'Cause-
Hinterkaifeck?
Yeah, Hinterkaifeck. Yeah, it's a
Hinterkaifeck.
German word apparently.
German?
It's a German word, yeah, and it means something like behind or just around the haven or something like that. I can't remember. I did do a little bit of research and then I completely forgot it. So anyway, the story is kind of a bit of a spooky one. It's a bit of a weird one. And the subtitle is "Someone Was Already Living There."
Oh no, that's spooky.
Shit. Yeah. So I want to start tonight's episode with a detail that kind of sounds small,
Okay.
but it isn't. Okay, so in late March of 1922, a farmer in Bavaria noticed something strange after a snowfall. So he walked outside and saw a single line of footprints coming from the edge of the forest. Okay.
Okay.
Now, that might not be abnormal for most people,
No, it's not.
but once you understand where this took place, it's a little bit sketchy. They went straight to his house, and then they stopped. No footprints led away. Okay, so that's the part that's a little bit creepy, right? You have footprints that come up, and then there's no going back. And this is especially, if you haven't gone out yourself recently, and you see that, and you're like, oh shit, that's kind of creepy.
But maybe those people will stay there inside.
Yeah, but isn't that even worse though? If
Yeah.
it's in your house, wouldn't you be a little creeped out if there was someone at our front door or at our in our lawn or in our backyard? We see footprints coming up to our
Yeah,
house.
that's true. I would be very skeptical, and I am curious.
Well, okay, so no footprints led away. There was just one path from the woods to the door. So the homeowner lived with his wife, with his adult daughter, and with his 2 grandchildren. And as of that very day, a new maid. Okay. Now, he never called the police, and within days of that event, every single person in the house would be dead.
Whoa!
Yeah, kind of creepy. So it's the Hinterkaifeck murders is again the title of the murders. One of the most disturbing unsolved crimes in European history, and not because of how violent it was, but because of what it suggests about presence. So there wasn't a break-in, there was no robbery gone wrong, but there was a possibility that someone was already there. That's where you go, oh my god, amazing. Yeah. Okay, so to understand this case, you have to understand where it happened. Now, Hinterkaifeck was not a town. It wasn't even really a place that you could point to on a map. It was the name of a single farmstead located about 70 kilometers north of Munich, again in Germany, surrounded by dense forests and open fields. Now, I had to look up what a farmstead actually is. Do you know what a farmstead is?
No.
No.
So how big? How big?
No. A farmstead is apparently just the term for what encompasses where the house and the barn and all of that. So that area is the farmstead, right? Where the buildings are and where the people live. Yeah, so that's the farmstead part, I guess, of the farm, right? Okay.
And does that mean that the persons who live there had some neighbors at all, or is only that
No. So this was an isolated place, like very, very isolated. They had no neighbors. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and so that's kind of the scary thing, is that you can't really scream out for help or anything, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're surrounded by forest and open fields, and again, it was 1922 in deep rural Bavaria. No electricity, no phones, no street lights. So pretty much the perfect setting for a horror film. And at night, it would have been completely dark, right? So it's not like we have lights on the street walks and like we have now.
Imagine.
Yeah, it's pitch black. It's the kind of darkness that sound carries, and isolation actually feels physical. So the nearest neighbors were far enough away that screams wouldn't be heard, and this really does matter for some of the details later in the story. Because whatever happened at Hinterkaifeck happened without any witnesses. Okay? Not surprising. They're in the middle of nowhere, right? So let's talk a little bit about the Gruber family. Now, the farm belonged to Andreas Gruber, and he was a 63-year-old man. And accounts from neighbors described him as not exactly a nice person. He was kind of a dick. He was an authoritarian, quick-tempered, and feared rather than respected. So people avoided him when possible. You know, that person, that grumpy old man that you don't want to see. His wife, and I'm going to butcher this name, Kazelia Gruber, was 72.
Okay.
So that's interesting in itself, right? She's 9 years older. I mean, good for them. That's great. That's amazing. But especially back then, it would have been a little bit more abnormal to have the woman be a little bit older than the man,
so?
Right? I think so. I would imagine. Okay. Wouldn't you? You don't think so?
Oh, well, I think so.
Oh,
but okay, well. I mean, like at that time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, whatever works for them, that's great. And I have no problem with that, obviously. Okay, so she was described as withdrawn and frail. So she was not described nearly the same way as Andreas. Andreas, like I said, he was this, authoritarian, grumpy old man. And she was just this frail person that was shy. And she rarely left the farm, right? So both of them lived together with their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, in her mid-30s. Now, Okay, now Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, had supposedly died in World War I. Now, here's something that's actually kind of interesting, is that his body was never recovered. And some people later question whether he was truly even dead at all. So, we'll keep that in mind. Now, Victoria had 2 children. Okay. Her daughter, Kazelia, was 7 years old. Now, you might be saying, well, I thought you said Kazelia was the grandma. Well, yeah, she is. She was the wife. Sorry, the wife. But she is also a grandma, and her granddaughter shares the same name, Kazelia, 7 years old. Old enough to understand fear, at least, right? And old enough to understand pain, of course, right?
Got the context.
And then she had her son, Joseph, who was 2. Okay. And Joseph is where things get a little bit uncomfortable, because years earlier, Andreas Gruber and Victoria Gabriel had been charged and convicted of incest.
Wait, hold on. Years later?
Years earlier.
Years earlier? Wow.
Years earlier, yeah.
Okay.
So they both...
so they're brother and sister?
Yeah. Yeah, and they actually served prison sentences because of this.
Wow.
Because it is illegal, right? I mean, I don't know, what is it like in Indonesia?
Definitely illegal. Come on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we should have introduced ourselves. We didn't.
We did not introduce ourselves. We didn't even do that.
I'm John, and this is Fabriana.
I'm Fabriana.
Yeah, and she is Indonesian, and I am Canadian, and we're both living in the States. We met here So in Iowa, of all places. So, weird. The flyover
Weirdly
city.
best.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so where were we?
Okay.
So they were charged
of
incest. So it sounds like they were brother and sister. They served their time.
But then they continued their marriage?
Right. So yeah, it sounds like they continued their relationship. Now Joseph's paternity, Joseph is the kid, remember the 2-year-old kid. His paternity was officially attributed to Victoria's husband, but given the timing, many people suspected that Andreas himself might have been the father.
Whoa!
Yeah.
No.
So it was not. It was a little.
No, that's so complicated.
Yeah, it's very gross. So we don't really know the details of this, and especially we didn't. There weren't all those DNA tests that you have now that you can check pretty easily for those sorts of things. But the timing was pretty suspect.
But I assume that Joseph's mom knew about this, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
about the relationship of their parents.
Well, Joseph's mom, I mean, she would have known, right?
Yeah,
if they were having relations, right? Of course.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's a little bit of a backstory there. Now, inside this isolated farmhouse, right? We're in the middle of nowhere. We have this violent man, right? We have a history of sexual abuse. We have family shame known throughout the community. And rumors that really never quite went away, right? So this wasn't exactly a peaceful home.
Okay? Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, you know, the what went on after that was not really expected, nonetheless, right? Because all of them ended up dead. So
whoa, yeah. The whole family.
Yeah, do you not remember that from the beginning?
Yeah. Well, I didn't expect all of them were dead.
All of them, yeah. No, they definitely all ended up dead. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the maid and the timing, okay? Because remember, it was the family plus the maid. Now, this woman's name, the maid's name, was Maria Baumgartner. Now, she was 44 years old. She had arrived at Hinterkaifeck on March 31st, 1922, the very day of the murders. Okay. You know, and
that's a little bit strange.
Yeah, it's a little suspicious.
Maybe she is not lucky enough.
Right, exactly. You'd think, oh man, this is obviously the maid. But the previous maid had quit suddenly, apparently because she believed the house was haunted. Okay, so she believed in in ghosts and hauntings and you kind of believe in that too, right?
You don't know? Could feel it. I don't know, but sometimes I'm so scared of ghosts.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a big thing in Indonesian culture, right?
Yeah, it is very superstitious people.
Very superstitious, yeah. Okay, well, so someone had already left the house because they felt unsafe, right? Whether it was because it was haunted or whatnot, it was an atmosphere that wasn't exactly something that they wanted to be in. Now Maria arrived with her belongings. She unpacked, she settled in, and that night she was murdered in her bed.
Oh,
okay, so Maria obviously was not the murderer, right? Everyone that was in that house that we have mentioned so far ended up dead.
They were killed, yeah.
Right, so we don't know, who the murderer was, right? Again, and I started this off with, this is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries. Now, she had no history with the family, no known enemies. And
what do you mean by she here is the Maria, right?
Yes. Okay. Maria had no history with the family, right? She was brand new to the place. And no known enemies whatsoever. So she was collateral. Or she saw something that she wasn't meant to see, right? Maybe she showed up just at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Really unfortunate.
Bad for her.
Yeah. So the warning signs. Okay, let's talk about, some of the warning signs in detail here. So let's go back to those footprints that we talked about at the beginning of the story. Now, Andreas Gruber told neighbors that he had seen footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house. Not away, just towards.
Mm-hmm.
He also reported hearing footsteps in the attic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hearing movement above him at night,
Mm-hmm.
discovering a newspaper that no one in the family had purchased, tools disappearing and reappearing, and finally his house keys vanished. Okay, so these are all things that he reported to his neighbors at some point in time.
Okay, but how long did that happen before he reported that case?
That's a good question. I am. Well, I mean, he didn't report this case because
he mentioned that there were
the
several
footprints
and the house keys were gone. So maybe that did not happen only once.
Well, I mean, this all happened around the same time, right? So he didn't. It's unclear.
So it's not the repeated actions.
No, but it's unclear. Yeah, but there were things that were recurring throughout the time period that were suspicious, and he was a little bit kind of wary of, right? It's suggesting that there was maybe someone living there, right? There's maybe someone around, or at least coming around when they weren't home, right? So, because these aren't subtle signs, right?
Yeah.
So they're the kind of things that today you would probably call the police immediately.
Yeah, I would put the cameras around the house, but
but this is 1922.
Exactly.
So
there were no such things.
No. But Andreas didn't call the police. So why, right? Now there's a few possibilities. He didn't want police near the family because of their past.
Yeah, right? That's possible.
It's a pretty big, pretty big no-no in any culture, really. And yeah, maybe he just didn't want them around, didn't trust them. I don't know. He believed he could handle it himself, maybe.
Yeah, or maybe he actually was the one who got involved in all of those.
Yeah, You mean if he was involved in the murders himself?
Yeah, and then he killed himself.
That's very possible. Yeah, that is possible. But I wonder how it would have happened with the murder weapon when we get to that. Okay. So we'll talk about that murder weapon in a bit. So, and it is possible that he did want to handle it himself because he was an authoritarian. He wasn't exactly a nice guy. He seemed to be very dominant, very, I could see him wanting to handle things himself, and because he could do it better than everyone else, right? Yeah. And maybe this is one of the most disturbing options, is that he already knew who it was.
But why did he let that, and he did not let anybody know if he knew it?
I don't know, but I wonder if he did know who it was, and he's telling his neighbors all these details. What would
create stories, and then like let the neighbors think about any possibilities themselves, and kind of bury the real fact of what happened.
Well, he nothing had happened yet, right? These are just details that happened before the murders, right? So it's unclear why he would lie about that.
That should be something that he was trying to cover.
Well, yeah, if he knew who it was, right? But it doesn't really make sense to me to
no,
but that's
he
one
was
of the
trying to
theories
create
that was out there.
a narrative in the society, in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's possible. Maybe because of the ghost, or the ghost that the previous maid had mentioned. Maybe he was trying to stir up chaos. Who knows? But anyway, there's tons of different possibilities, and we don't really know the real reason. So let's get to the actual night of the murders. Now, investigators believed that the murders happened late on March 31st or very early in April. So very early April 1st. And here's the key detail. The victims apparently were killed one by one. Okay, so it wasn't like a group killing. It wasn't like a massacre all at once.
Probably just by one killer.
It was one person, one at one.
Wow.
Which Yeah, no attacks together, no surprised in their sleep. They were lured one at a time
Oh,
into the barn.
wow.
Yeah. So what does that? I mean, what does that suggest to you? Because that, to me, what is your interpretation there?
Well, first, to me, that's really weird. If I mean, if at night I'm sleeping, even like in the other bedroom, I would still hear if someone moved and I would follow secretly.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how that killer lured them one by one without
No, but that,
the
I
first,
mean,
the second,
well,
the
to
third.
me, what it suggests is that they knew the person, right? Because how could you be lured to the barn by some stranger unless they had you at like gunpoint or
You're
at
right.
knife point or something like
Yeah.
that? But if he's doing it one by one without
Then
getting caught, and it's a family full of it's a house full of people, so like how is he gonna do that without someone else seeing him at some point? That would be
I
pretty.
know.
You'd have to be like a ninja.
And I know.
It's like,
I would like to jump into the conclusion that Andres probably was the one who did that.
yeah, but you can't though, because I mean, he could have.
Well, he
You're right.
could have.
He could
Like
have
he
killed
could
himself.
die.
Yeah,
He would kill himself.
that's true. That's true. Okay, so it's pretty clear that they were killed one by one. They were lured into the barn, and the murder weapon
Uh-huh.
was a mattock. Okay,
What
so
is a mattock?
Mattock. Now, I had never heard of that
What is a
before because
mattock?
we're not farmers, so we have no idea. And maybe this is something that's still used all the time, but it's a heavy, blunt agricultural tool that is often on farms and properties around farms. So
Well, yeah,
if
it's
you've ever seen,
agricultural
I
tool.
mean, I think of
Blunt, you said.
it's one of those like really long. It's got like a big, a long handle, and then it's almost like it looks kind of almost like an axe.
Okay.
But it's, oh man, it's a, you think of, I know how to describe it. It's like when you go into the mines, if you think of like a stereotypical picture of a miner, you know, when they're breaking up the rocks with that wooden thing handle with like the metal thingy. That, I think that's what a mattock is.
Well, yeah. I will.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm gonna picture that in my head. It's like X, but I don't know why it's blunt. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's
All right.
it's not. I mean, it's just that it's not like a knife.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it could definitely kill you very easily. Okay, so Andreas Gruber was most likely actually first, apparently, in this story. So that there goes your theory about him doing it and then killing himself,
wrong.
right?
Okay.
So then, the theory is that it was him first, then his wife, then Victoria, who is their daughter, remember?
And
Then sorry, go ahead.
then granddaughter.
Then the granddaughter, yep, the
And then the
7-year-old
grandson.
Kazilia. And this is the detail that seasoned investigators kind of pause. Now, she apparently, Kazilia, did not die immediately.
You mean the daughter or the granddaughter?
The granddaughter, the 7-year-old granddaughter,
Yeah.
yep. She apparently lived for hours alone.
Wow.
In the barn,
so
surrounded by the
scary.
bodies of her family.
Wow, that's so scary.
Because
for
the
her.
evidence shows, it's terrifying. And I mean, can you imagine being a 7-year-old seeing that
I would be so
and being a lot?
traumatized.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably as dark as it is to say this. It might, I don't know if I'd want to live on if I were in her shoes, and that just happened. You'd be scarred for life.
Yeah, exactly. Like the memories are just, oh my god.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
About all those scary things.
Evidence showed she tore clumps of hair from her own head before finally dying. Now, you got to think of that, but I mean, why would you do that? I can imagine you'd be going a little bit.
It's a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
Girl.
Well, you'd be so incredibly stressed out, right? I mean, how would
You
you
would
deal
cry
with
out.
that?
I would be so confused.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And you'd
I
probably
would
be
run
so
around. I
stressed
don't
out
know.
and confused and
Yeah.
just, you'd go a little bit crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so after that.
Did she ask for help though?
No, because remember, this is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, but if I were her, I would probably just cry and, just shout, help, help, help.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I don't know if she did that. She probably was doing that, but she didn't. She couldn't contact anyone. So after, she's pulling out her hair and she had been alive for a while, the killer entered the house. Right? And Maria Baumgartner, now remember, she is the maid, was killed in her room. And even Joseph, the 2-year-old, was killed in his crib.
Oh, no.
But the thing is that there was no rush, there was no panic, just methodical movement, right? I was having a hard time saying that word. So it was clear that this person was not stressed out, not moving quickly. Sounded like they were pretty surgical with their movements. Okay, so that's at least what the evidence suggests in the house, right? There's no way of telling what actually happened, but these are what, and people can be pretty good at determining things like that based on like blood spatter analysis and
but we don't know like back then how accurate.
Well, we don't know, and a lot of this could just be hype and stories, and you know how telephone works, right? When you tell someone one thing and it ends up completely different later.
Yeah, so people would develop the story.
Exactly. Yep. So okay. So after the murders took place, this is where Hinterkaifeck becomes something else entirely. Now, because whoever did this, right, did this gruesome killing of all of these people in the house, apparently this person did not leave, right? So there's strong evidence that they did not leave the house. And again, strong is I'm putting that in quotes here for those you can't see. Because we don't really know, but this is the working theory, right? That they didn't leave for several days. Now, some of the evidence here was that food was cooked and eaten.
Ooh.
Okay, the fireplace was used.
Okay,
livestock was fed.
Wow.
Right, so they even fed the farm animals.
Interesting.
And the house was clearly lived in. Right.
Oh, interesting.
And
How did the neighbors figure out about the murder? So the killers finally left the house.
Well, that's a good question, and we'll get to that. Yeah. Okay, so just imagine sleeping in that house. Imagine hearing the wind outside, knowing what was in the barn. All those dead bodies in the barn. And this is just someone chilling, just
That's
someone
crazy.
living in this house with blood everywhere, with dead bodies, and knowing that
the normal people, even if they kill other people, they would leave immediately. Apparently, this killers probably were not like that at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, anyone that murders a whole bunch of people is probably not in a very good mental state.
But still, like, rationally, if they murder people for certain motives, they would immediately just leave and they don't want the police to.
I was trying to tell you to get your hand away from your mouth. You got to talk into the microphone.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Kind of, yeah, because you're doing this, you're gonna be blocking. Okay. Okay, but yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so let's get back to it. So they didn't leave, right? There was food, eaten and all that. Now, this person, obviously, if they're doing all that, they're feeling pretty comfortable, which is very very sick, right? So let's get back to your question about, how did they get found, right?
Mm-hmm.
So about 4 days passed. Okay, so the mail clearly was piling up. And a mechanic arrived and found the farm eerily silent, right? Because remember, this is a pretty big, there's a lot of people there. And it is a farm. You're going to usually see people working outside and whatnot. But this mechanic arrives. And again, it's weirdly silent. So the neighbors thought something of it, and they forced their way into the barn, right? Because they're like, what is going on here? And I'm sure they called out and looked around, and no one's answering, right? So they ended up forcing their way into the barn. Now inside, of course, they found the bodies stacked, partially covered with hay.
Yeah. Oh my God. Maybe the murderer would burn them.
Yeah, you'd think, but they didn't. They just left the bodies there.
Maybe because the killer knew that the neighbors would come, and he was almost doing it, but, he got a sense that, oh, okay, now people knew about it, and I would live.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's. I don't really know. It's. Yeah, maybe he thought, or maybe he heard the neighbors come, right? And that's But I don't understand why he would. I mean, do you even understand why he would be in the place to begin with and not leave at all? He's just leaving a whole bunch of bodies just to be found.
No, but but we still have one character that was part of the family, and he was reported dead, but the body was never found.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? Who knows what happens there? Because he and remember, Joseph, was possibly not actually his kid.
Exactly.
Right. So that's a possibility. Okay, so the police arrived, but by then the scene was hopelessly contaminated, right? I mean, there were neighbors and everyone was walking around. So everything is going to be, kind of hard to figure out who committed what if the whole scene is compromised. So over the years, there were more than about 100 suspects named.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah, so it's a lot.
Oh my God.
But again, the scene was completely contaminated. There was so much going on that it's really tough to tell what actually happened. None stuck, though. None of those suspects actually stuck. There was no confession by any of them. No forensic, smoking gun. And again, they didn't really have great forensic tools back then. So the case went cold at that time, right? So,
but what happened to those people, 100 suspects? How did they ever stay in jail at all, or was that just the police talk to them and interview them about this and that, and
I'm not sure, but I suspect they interviewed quite a few people, given the gruesome nature of it, right? They probably had suspects that they were really hoping was the killer, so that they could tell
but they
people.
could not prove.
They couldn't prove anything. Nothing stuck. Nothing really made any sense. But I kind of like your theory about it being the husband of the daughter, right? Because
he would have a great motive to do that.
Yeah, he would. His motive, definitely, if he found out that Joseph, the 2-year-old boy, was actually Andreas's child and not his,
and his wife is also Andreas' daughter.
Yep. Yeah, I know. It's
wild.
Pretty sickening. But that is a possibility, right? Because they never found his body. So that's one of the theories, right? So people return to Hinterkaifeck because it really does challenge some of our assumptions, right? We want to believe danger comes from the outside, but in this case, it kind of suggests that they might have already been inside the place, right? So it probably was, someone that they knew deeply, right? So and again, I like your theory the most. I think that it's probably. It makes the most sense, doesn't it? That the husband that was off to war comes back and he finds out that the kid's not his, and it would be a lot easier for him to lure people out to the barn, right? Because there was no struggle, there was no, nothing seemed out of place. He was very, very methodical, but in any case. So this case, does suggest that, danger doesn't always come from outside, right? It could be on the inside and someone that you know really well, right?
Way.
So that isolation that if you live out in isolation and you're hoping only the closest people are near you, it doesn't necessarily protect you, unfortunately, right? The isolation doesn't always protect you. It hides things once in a while. So, in 1923, right, just a year after the murders happened, the farm was demolished. The land was cleared. Only a small marker remains there right now. And the big question remains, who was already there, right? And how long had they been watching? But, I don't really think it's that huge of a question, right? Who was already there? I mean, logically, is there really any other conclusion? Unless that was the idea, is that someone set this up even, perfectly to set this husband up, but it doesn't make sense why they wouldn't find the body.
Well, my second theory will be, which I don't believe in my own, is one of the maids that left the house, probably, but I don't know.
That's possible too, right? I mean, considering how much abuse was in the house, she could have been abused.
There is a motive to do that.
That's true. She could have actually, made up an excuse about the house being haunted so that she could leave without any suspicion.
But luring the people that the killer murdered, for the second theory, is probably more questionable than the first one.
Yeah. But you never know, right? I mean,
that's true.
But it is pretty clear, though, that whoever it was
somebody
close to the family. So, that is the Hinterkaifeck murders that makes our first ever podcast.
That's so scary.
It's probably terrible, so don't hate us, guys. This is our first time. But yeah, thanks for listening nonetheless. To our one listener out there. Probably our parents.
We are gonna see you again in our next episode.
Yeah, and in the next episode, I have no idea what it's gonna be, but the way we're doing this is I start with one, and I tell the story, she listens and reacts, and then it's gonna be the reverse for the next one. So, you know what? Like, will tell us next time.
I don't know if I can. We're gonna try.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited for that one. And we will see you next week.